What's up, y'all? Welcome to Tabletop Bros. This is week 5 of the 2,000 point Warhammer 40,000 Escalation League. My faction is Space Marines, my chapter is Deathwatch. I'm running the Blackspear Task Force Detachment. Each week we paint up 250 points, the league is 8 weeks long, and at the end we have a 2,000 point army, fully painted and ready for big 40k. Let's run through my 1,250 point list, and then I'll tell you about this week's game, as I wash and shade my new additions. My Warlord is the Watch Captain. He has the Thief of Secrets Enhancement and is leading the 10 Deathwatch Veterans. I have a Jump Captain with Thunderhammer and Sheild. He has the Tome of Ectoclades Enhancement, and he's leading 10 Jump Intercessors. The Full Boss Lieutenant is back, and he's leading 5 Reavers. I've added 5 Infiltrators to block out Deep Strike, and I'm using the Repulsor for transport capacity and a little extra firepower. And of course, the Gladiator Lancer is bringing the big guns. This week's mission is Slay the Warlord. There were 5 objectives, 1 in each deployment zone and 2 in no man's land. My opponent was playing Tyranids and undefeated. He's rocking a lot of big bugs, and I knew it was going to be a tough match. He had a Hive Tyrant, Tyrannofex with Acid Spray. He had Old One Eye with 2 Carnifex Bodyguard, an Exocrine for fire support, some Warriors, Zoanthropes, and a few Gaunt squads. I knew I would have to play defensive early and give up board control. This definitely wasn't ideal, and I was really hoping to get the first turn. Unfortunately, he won the roll-off and secured the board, locking down his own objective with the Exocrine and Gaunts, ready to unload on anything that popped into view. He secured no man's land on the left flank with the Carnifexes and Old One Eye, and the right flank with Zoanthropes and more Gaunts, and the Tyrannofex moved up and was a real threat for Overwatch. If I moved at all, he would do some serious damage with his auto-hitting Flamer, high-strength shots, AP, and 2 damage. I need to stay out of range or sight, or that thing was going to be felling some Marines for sure. I was locked down on my home objective, behind the large ruin. The Watchmaster and Veterans were embarked in the Repulsor. I was able to avoid my opponent's first round of shooting, but was pinned down early. I moved out the tanks, staying out of range, got a line of sight on the Tyrannofex, but failed to take it down. Playing defensive would cost me, as my opponent scored 12 points for controlling 3 objectives to my 1. The Carnifexes barreled forward behind Old One Eye, and the Tyrannofex continued to threaten with Overwatch. His 18-inch range and auto-hitting Flamer was definitely scary, but I was able to stay out of sight and range again. The rest of the Tyranid army continued to secure the board, and I knew I would have to make a move in turn 2, as I only scored 4 points from my home objective, and I needed to engage badly. I jumped the captain and his intercessor bodyguard into a ruin near the Carnifexes on the left flank with a plan. The infiltrators had to move up and screen out the Carnifexes from hitting the Repulsor and Captain Squad, but in the process I left my home objective unsecured. The Gladiator had moved out towards the right flank, and together with the Repulsor had secured line of sight on the Tyrannofex. They both fired everything, which was enough to finally take down the Tyrannofex, but my opponent was running away with a big lead. I made some early mistakes, and with his turn 3, I was about to pay the price. He scored another 12 points, so it was now 24-8. I'd killed the Tyrannofex, but was going to score 0 on primary, and about to eat a lot of shooting, and a charge from the Old One Eye and the Tyrannofexes. He unloaded all his guns on the infiltrators and the Repulsor. He took out enough of them that the scream was no more. The Carnifexes had a big enough hole to get to the Repulsor, and at a desperation I overwatched, doing almost no damage to the Carnifexes, and they easily made the charge. I was positioned to heroically intervene with the captain and his bodyguard from the nearby ruin, but things were about to get messy. Old One Eye struck first, putting everything into the Repulsor. Its Ceramite armor stood no chance, and not only did it die, but it exploded, erupting in a ball of flames, wiping out the infiltrators and damaging everything nearby. The Watchmaster and Veterans disembarked, but couldn't quite get back to my home objective. They'd be positioned to strike back on my turn, but not before the Carnifexes took down most of the Jump Intercessors. The captain and remaining intercessors struck back, felling one of the Carnifexes, and were able to pile in onto one of the objectives in no man's land. So on my turn 3, the score was 32 for my opponent to my 12. It was now or never. I popped the Tome of Ectoclades for full rerolls on 2 targets. I placed it on the Carnifexes and the Exocrine. I declared Fury Tactics for sustained hits on 6s and went all in. The Gladiator rained down destruction on the Exocrine, hit with both shots, one of which was a 6, exploding into 3, and killed the beast with ease. The Watchmaster left the captain behind to deal with Old One Eye and the wounded Carnifex. As they advanced forward towards the other no man's land objective, heavy bolters and flamers downing the other Carnifex, as they ran forward to secure board control. The gladiator was now securing my home objective, the captain and his bodyguard fighting over the left flank, and the reavers and lieutenant had dropped in to support the watchmaster. They shot and charged the gaunts on the right flank. The watchmaster and his squad charged the zoanthropes, and after a deadly counteroffensive, the gaunts and zoanthropes were removed. Old One Eye was on a single wound, did quite a bit of damage on the strike back, but the tides were turning for the Deathwatch. The trap was sprung, but the Deathwatch had paid a heavy price for their mistakes. With only a couple of gaunts on his home objective and the Hive Tyrant left out of position, Old One Eye on a single wound, and a now nearly tied score, my opponent used Shadow in the Warp and went for a Hail Mary play. But to no avail. I struck down Old One Eye and cleaned up the last few gaunts. The Tyrant stood no chance. The Deathwatch secured the victory and remained undefeated, but I had played too defensively. I made some mistakes early, and it nearly cost me the game. Lesson learned. My mobility and the Tome of Ectoclades had saved the day, but I would not make these mistakes again. The repulsor transport capacity was nice, but the weapons were underwhelming. It was time to upgrade it to an executioner. I also needed more veterans. The big squad was great, but a couple small squads would be clutch. I knew exactly what was going in next week's list, but it was time to actually plan out the rest of my 2K army. I liked adding things as needed, but I knew the last few weeks I want to plan the rest of my 2,000 points in advance and stop winging it. The Lancer had performed amazingly every single game. I needed a second one by the time I hit 2K. I also needed a way to get more command points, take advantage of the Deathwatch strats, and I had an idea using an impulsor and the orbital comms array. I also needed some cheap units that I could trade early for some board control. The big units were nice and all, but I definitely felt disadvantaged during deployment and also very limited throughout the games. I had a lot of planning to do. I love how the army was looking so far, and aside from a few player mistakes, everything was performing very well. The lieutenant and reavers had proven themselves useful every game. For such a cheap unit, I knew they were worth their points in gold. The jump intercessors and captain were great, but I think 10 might be redundant. So maybe I'd pull out 5 of them and give the impulsor a shot in my next game. With only 4 undefeated players left, any mistakes from here on out would likely be the difference. I was having a great time so far with the Escalation League. It was loads of fun, and I'm absolutely loving the Deathwatch. So far I'd gone undefeated. I learned quite a bit about Deathwatch as a whole, and with next week's game at 1,500 points, the league would be over before I knew it. Today's game was the closest I'd come to being defeated, and there was definitely a moment there where it looked like my opponent was going to run away with the victory. If you enjoyed today's video and the league so far, hopefully by now TableTop Bros has earned your subscription. If you want to know what happens in the rest of the league, make sure to tune in next week, as I'd be facing off against Gazkul Thraka and an Orc-Wa. But if I'm going to be adding in 10 more veterans and swapping in an impulsor for the 5 jump intercessors I just painted, and with the Depticon right around the corner, I knew I had my work cut out for me. So I guess that's it from the TableTop Bros. Later!